to apply for customized training. It's a nuts and bolts discussion. So how do all those pieces fit together? How do you come forward and ask for that type of training? How do you find out who's eligible for training? And like I said before, questions are expected and encouraged. I really want to hear from you. If you have anything that you don't feel comfortable saying in front of this small group, like I said, you can contact me afterwards or put your question in the chat, ask it with a raised hand. I'd be happy to do that right now. So we're going to talk about customized training. And let's go to our first slide. I've got to move my mouse. So what is customized training? Customized training is part of a program that we offer to businesses that allow us to reimburse up to 50% of the cost of that training per eligible individual. You can train one person. We've done a training with 102 people in the training. So it really doesn't matter how many people in the training. What matters is that it's a training that you feel is necessary for your staff to upgrade their skills. So what's the first step in applying for training? For most businesses, if we've never done business with you before, we have to do what's called a due diligence, which is essentially a business background check. The two documents are on the slide. If you have done business with us before, so like John has used our OJT program, to utilize customized training, he can skip the first step and go right on to the next step. So it's only necessary for the first time you use customized training, or if you're a brand new business, or if for some reason we see that there's been a dramatic change in the status of your business. So sometimes you'll have a company that's bought out by another company. We may be required to do that due diligence again in order to make them eligible to receive training funding. Like I said, it is just two documents that are check boxes that are digitally. You can just check those boxes and sign them. You send them back to me, and then I send that to the State of New York Department of Labor for processing. That typically takes 3 to 5 days. Sometimes if you've had this done way in the past, it happens much quicker, but really is a very easy process and doesn't take very long. Let's go. So the next step for customized training is we have a template, which is called the Summary of Needs. And I send you that template and you complete it with information about that particular training. So the first thing you would fill in is, why do you need this training? How is it going to help your staff? What skills are you going to develop? How many people are going to be trained? When's the training going to happen? Who's going to provide that training? What does it offer your business as far as an improvement of the skills of your staff? The second part of that summary of needs is the training impact. And because we are under a Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act legislation, or law, we have to particularly follow under 5 categories for training impact. And the interesting thing is almost any training would fit into one of these categories. The first one is the introduction of new technology. So say you've got a new point of sale system, or you have a new customer management system, anything that you're installing, a new piece of equipment on the floor, nobody knows how to use it, they're going to charge you to train. We'd be happy to work with you on that. The other is the new introduction of a new production or service procedure. You've bought new types of products and they're going to teach you how to use that product or how that works. The other is upgrading to a new jobs that require additional skills. So someone may be working as a machinist, has been a machinist for 20 years, and they want to move them into a management role. Moving into that management role would be an upgrade to a new skill, and they may be wanting to send them away for management training. That would be fundable under our customized training funding. The fourth one is workplace literacy. And, some people say that they have like bucket 10 that you can throw almost anything into. This is how I look at workplace literacy. Almost any training is assisting someone with doing better with their job, improving their literacy, improving their understanding of what they're doing. So sometimes that one is the bucket that most trainings will fall into. And finally, and the one that's hardest for people to understand, is the appropriate purposes identified by the local workforce development board. This essentially means that if it doesn't fit into any one of these categories, our organization is overseen by a workforce development board of 24 public and private sector business persons, and they can make the decision upon whether we are going to fund that particular training. Sometimes if the training has a very large cost on it, we'll take that training to the board for them to determine whether we should invest that amount of money for that particular training in our area with that one business. And sometimes that's just determined by how much funding we have available for that year, because sometimes we do have limits and we have to be careful about how we allocate our resources so that it's fair across Chemung, Schuyler, and Steuben County. One of the things we ask for is the history of the business on our summary of needs, and that can be really copied and pasted from your website really quickly. I don't even ask, the formatting doesn't have to be the same as the letter, it doesn't have to look all formal, just as long as we have that information, because all of this information on the summary of needs actually ends up in your reimbursement contract, almost word for word what you have said to us. And that's the opportunity for me to gather everything I need to create a contract that will pass the muster with our auditors. Let me see here. So on the summary of needs, there's a section where you're providing the training information. So although our customized training dollars go to the business is reimbursed 50% of the cost of training any eligible trainee. The actual training service gets attached to the trainees, because what we're tracking is how are New York State workers being upskilled? What specific skills are they receiving? We want to make sure we keep track of that on these people's accounts. So we would ask for the trainee name. We're going to ask for their job title. We're going to ask for the last 4 digits of their social security number, and we're going to ask for their wages per hour. Now, some people will say, well, why do you need their social? We have to look them up into our database, and we can do that by just the last 4 digits of their social and their full name. Because when we start working on putting together training packets, we need to know who's been registered in our system and who hasn't. Does general safety fall into any of these categories? OSHA 10 training does not, only because it is widely used and we would use up all our money really fast. So about the only training that doesn't fall into that I can think of in safety training would just be OSHA 10. Anything above and beyond that or real specific can fall into that category. Let me move on to the next slide. So we also want you to tell us how you want to accomplish your goal. So who is that training provider? What is the training? When is it going to occur? The start date and the stop date, because we'll write a contract that begins and ends at those dates. How many hours is this training going to be? And what is the cost of the training? We ask some of those questions because when we make this, it's called an offering ID that gets attached to the customer's record. We need that information to create that ID number. Some of it is just so we can put it into the contract and figure out what is the cost per person for that training. The best way to provide that information is to just hand me the trainer's proposal. So if you've reached out and they've told you this is how much it's going to cost per person, or this is how much it's going to cost for a group of people, just provide me that proposal. It's a very easy way to do that. Now, also on that summary of needs, I've told you that we've asked for the information on the trainees. I'm going to take that information. I'm going to look them up into our unemployment insurance database, which we call OSIS, the One-Stop Operating System. And I'm going to find out whether they're registered. If they're registered in our system, you'll see on this slide, there's just a New York number that comes out. If they're not registered in their system, I usually send back the X's with the last 4 of their social. And what we're looking for is eligibility. We want to see who's registered, what kind of documents do we need from them, and what makes a trainee eligible. So an eligible trainee is somebody who, if they were born after December 31st, 1959, and is a male, they're registered with the Selective Service. So we're not allowed to use federal funding for someone who has not registered willfully for the Selective Service. They need to be registered in our unemployment database. If they have not collected unemployment or not utilized one of our career centers ever, we can register them with a 1-page document. And that 1-page document is very similar to a resume. The other thing that is eligibility based is their maximum wage rate. So we can't fund anybody who makes $35 an hour or above. Our Workforce Development Board considers that at this time to be self-sufficient and not in need of additional training that needs to be funded through our organization. Because we're specifically looking to upskill individuals so we can open entry-level positions and consistently keep doing that. So once I receive that summary of needs, I look people up, I send you back this document needs. And if you look at it, it has ONET, which is something we'll fill in. It says intake package, ES-102, copy of ID, and OSIS registration. I know all of that looks really kind of like what? So the next slide, I'm going to show you what that is. We need to know some information about who you're going to train. So the first document is called an individual employment plan, and it is a digital document with some questions, and most often for customized training, the answers to those questions are exactly the same. You know, why do you need this training? What is the skills gap? How do you hope to achieve this? So you can fill this in digitally and send one or print one out to each person in the training. What's important for them at this point is that they sign off on the bottom and date that. So each trainee has to do that on their own, indicating they understand they're going to be trained and this is what they're going to be trained on and this is why they're being trained on that. The next document we request is an ES-102, which looks very official. If you look at it, it says Department of Labor on the top. It is required that we ask each person we put into training some basic questions. Now, some of these questions are something you may not want to reveal to your employer. Are you a person with a disability? Are you collecting or as a member of your family receiving public assistance? So the trainee can choose to fill this out, but the best part about this is the line that says, however, answers are voluntary. If they choose not to answer that, they can just put their name on the first page, sign and date the second page, and send it to me. So that becomes a part of this package that you would collect from each trainee. So if someone is registered in our system, the only thing that you would need to provide us for each training on that person would be the individual employment plan and the ES-102. And both of them, the trainee only has to sign and date. If they choose to answer the questions on the ES-102, that's fine. If they don't, that's fine too. So ultimately, each trainee has a package. And I was talking with the executive director yesterday, and he said that you should look at these packages kind of like your onboarding package when you're hiring somebody. You have to pull together a bunch of pieces, and it has to be complete before you send it through. What I would prefer to is that when you pull together the pieces for each person based on that little spreadsheet telling you what you need, that they would be complete and sent at one time too. Because once I gather these documents, I forward them on to the Career Center, to employment counselors to do data entry for us. And they're having a hard time if they're collecting like a driver's license here, an ES-102 over here, and an OSIS a registration form here. It's very hard for them to keep it all together. So it's nice to get it all in a package. So at minimum, you would provide an individual employment plan and the ES-102. If the individual isn't registered, then we have what this CSS Workforce New York Career Center registration form. It's a one-page document, and yes, it does get the rest of that person's social. We need that in order to create an account for them. And then the rest of the information is really just what you would find on their resume. So that their resume could be provided if you have one on file. They wouldn't have to fill this out, but we still would need the first 5 of their social in order to create a record. And we would need a copy of their driver's license. Once we put that into our system, it is shredded. And once it's been in there once, we don't ever need to put it back in again. So at most 2 pages, or at most 4 documents, at least 2 documents in a package sent for each trainee. And like I said, I give you a little spreadsheet that tells you what you need to provide. So what do we do with that once we receive it? Well, like I said, it gets sent off to the Career Center for processing. They're literally just doing data entry into our OSIS system. Once they've completed and told me everybody who is eligible, because they'll check their selective service. You don't have to check the selective service. They'll create those ONET numbers for them so that we can match them to job postings. Are you all familiar with what the ONET is? Have you ever used it as a resource? So the ONET, because I'm only seeing John shaking his head, the ONET is a resource online that takes job titles and actually gives a full description of the tasks that are required to complete those job titles. It's a great resource if you're writing a job posting that you don't have any other information on. You can go in and look up general labor or assembly, manufacturing positions, and it'll actually pull up and give you phrases that you can use in your job posting so that it matches most specifically to the job you may have. So with that information, I take the summary of needs and literally reproduce that into your contract. So that becomes the center section of the contract. We generate this agreement. It is a reimbursement agreement, so you will never owe us any money unless we have overpaid you. And we take some very specific care not to do that, because that's a difficult thing to do, to ask somebody to give you money back. So we have a couple opportunities to have some checks and balances on that before we actually cut a check. But the most important part of this is when we get to the part where we're starting the agreement must be generated prior to the start of the training, and it must be signed prior to the start of the training. Once that training begins, we are unable to fund something. So I've had a lot of people reach out to me and say, hey, we did this training last week. I have the invoices here. I'm like, well, I can't fund that because we have to do this work prior to the start of the training. Next. So in the end, which we call step 6, tell us how it went. So we would need a certificate of completion. We could use a sign-in sheet that has both the instructor and the trainees signing off on it with the date of the training. We would need an invoice from the training provider showing that that was the cost of that actual training. We do not reimburse any per diem expenses, so travel, food, hotel. None of that can be included in the cost of the training or the wages of the training participants. It is just the actual cost of the training. And then we would need a proof of payment. I'm showing here a canceled check, but it could be a credit card statement from your business with everything else redacted and just that one purchase indicated on the statement. Those are 2 different ways that typically people show me their proof of payment. So we're not going to give you money for that training until you show us that you have actually paid the training provider. And then finally, we send you a reimbursement voucher. I'm sure John's familiar with these with OJTs because we do it for that as well. But the reimbursement voucher is kind of like that last chance for you to take a look at how much it costs, how much we should reimburse, and what's available in funding. Sometimes there is an adjustment. The cost of the training was different. You were given sometimes you're given a discount on that training. We can't keep funding it at the top payment. We would fund it at the discounted rate, so we would recalculate for that. If the amount of people that took the training changed and it was a cost per person, we would change that bottom line on that as well. But we would send that to you with a description of why the actual payout has changed and ask you to sign off on that. I have to sign off on that too, and so does our executive director. So that should be 3 people looking to make sure that we have provided an accurate payment for the business. And most often, it fits exactly with what was proposed. So it's usually not that much of a challenge. And then the best part is CSS Workforce New York actually cuts you a check from our fiscal department. You don't have to wait for it to go to the state to be approved. It is done right at our current local level. And you'll receive a check from us that you can allocate in any way, shape, or form you want. That is actually it. Does anybody have any questions about this? The process is very step-by-step oriented in this sense. If anybody is interested in moving forward, I would love to send you the digital documents. I can type in my email address. Boom. And we just have a brand new web page. So these documents aren't available there yet because I haven't gone in and shifted everything to the digital documents that have occurred during COVID. So I'm going to do that really soon and make sure that all the current documents are there. But if you need them, please feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to send them over to you. I'm always happy to, I'm going to also put my phone number in here because I am working sometimes from the she shed at home. Feel free to call me if you have any questions. So now we're really just open for questions. I'm going to stop the recording so that you might feel better about just having an open conversation.